80 samurai staring down the full force of the Mongol Empire. Doesn't that sound completely insane? According to me, this is one of those moments in history that feels almost impossible. The unstoppable Mongols had crushed nations, yet on a tiny Japanese island, 80 men stood. And here's where it gets even stranger. The Mongols didn't just show up out of nowhere. They had been eyeing Japan for years. By 1268, Kublai Khan already had letters sent demanding Japan's surrender. Of course, the Japanese didn't bite. That's when the Mongols got serious. They started building ships, yes, ships, which are wild because the Mongols were the kings of horseback, not the sea. Naval combat wasn't their thing. So who did they lean on? The Koreans. They borrowed everything, ships, sailors, and even food supplies. The numbers are staggering. Around 15,000 soldiers, a mix of Mongols, Northern Chinese, Khitan, and Yursen warriors. Add another 6,000 to 8,000 Korean soldiers and about 7,000 sailors. And this wasn't some ragtag fleet either. We're talking 300 warships plus another 400 to 500 smaller boats. Imagine looking out at the horizon and seeing that many masts and the weapons they carried. Straight up nightmare fuel for the Japanese. Poison-tipped arrows, heavy rawhide shields, and worst of all, gunpowder bombs. Black ceramic orbs the size of coconuts that exploded with fire and shrapnel. Japan had never seen anything like this. So, the Mongols had the tech, the numbers, and the momentum. On paper, Japan shouldn't have had a chance. But history doesn't play out on paper, right? But wait, here's the twist. Japan wasn't exactly prepared either. They had no national army at all. None. Back then, the system was called shuen, basically private estates run by lords. When trouble came knocking, those lords would call up their samurai and hope it was enough. Enter Hojo Tokamune. He wasn't the emperor, but he was the guy actually pulling the strings. And Tokamune didn't mess around. When word spread of the Mongols' plans, he ordered warriors to gather in Kyushu, the island most at risk. And here's the crazy part. To defend Hakata Bay, they built stone walls stretching for miles. That might not sound impressive now, but for 13th century Japan, that was revolutionary. No one had ever seen defensive construction like that in the country's history. Still, when the Mongols finally arrived, it wasn't Kyushu that took the first punch. It was a little island out front, a speck in the strait called Tsushima, and the man in charge there would soon write one of the most legendary last stands ever told.
May your death benefit all beings.
And here's where the story zooms in. The first line of defense wasn't some massive castle or army. It was Tsushima, a small island, barely a dot on the map. The man in charge, Sō Sukekuni, young, sharp, and absolutely fearless. He didn't have an army at his back, just 80 mounted samurai and about 300 villagers, mostly fishermen with whatever weapons they could grab. Against thousands. Insane odds. But here's the thing. The land itself fought for him. Tsushima had a narrow coastline backed by steep, rocky mountains. No easy retreat, no wide open plains. Just choke points, cliffs, and shadows. Perfect for an ambush. Sukekuni turned the island into a trap, a watch post on a cliff to spot enemy sails with signal fires ready to roar like a chain reaction across the ridgeline. Ambush pits were dug deep and disguised with branches. Huge logs cut thick as dragon trunks waiting to roll downhill. And the mountain passes filled with hidden archers. It wasn't just defense, it was chess. Every goat path, every slope, every ridge was turned into a weapon. And then, the horizon darkened. First, a strange ship slipped into the bay, then another, then dozens. Finally, hundreds of masts rose like a forest on the water. Black and red flags snapped in the wind, and the cliffs trembled as Korean war drums pounded, a sound designed to break nerves before the fight even started. Imagine standing there, 80 samurai, watching a sea filled with the largest armada Japan had ever witnessed. The fleet wasn't random either. The Koreans lined the flanks with tall warships towering over any Japanese boat. In the center, Mongol troop carriers loaded with armored cavalry. And below deck, Chinese gunpowder ships carrying the secret weapon that Japan had never seen before. The invaders carried strange black ceramic balls about the size of coconuts. When hurled, they burst apart with fire and shrapnel. To the samurai, this wasn't just war. It was like watching the gods throw fire. The crescent of ships stretched across the bay. It was overwhelming. And yet, Sukekuni didn't flinch. He lit the signal. The trap was about to spring. Here's where it explodes. Literally, a Mongol officer barked the order and the first wave surged forward. 7 hours. Literally. N. Shields locked together, spears pointed, moving in perfect rhythm. And then, one lone arrow cut the air. Sukekuni's signal. In an instant, the cliffs came alive. Arrows poured down like a waterfall. Hidden samurai charged, shouting their ancestors' names, striking fear before their blades even landed. The quiet island suddenly roared with war cries. Ambush pits swallowed Mongol soldiers whole. Cavalry horses stumbled, legs shattered on sharpened stakes. And then came the logs. Massive tree trunks rolling downhill like unstoppable battering rams smashing through shield lines. The Mongols tried to fire back, but branches blocked their bows. Their famed cavalry, completely useless on the rocky slopes. Every time they thought they had cornered the defenders, the samurai vanished, reappearing from another hillside. And that's the beauty of it, the contrast. The Mongols fought in heavy blocks, advancing slowly and steadily. The samurai broke into small groups, darting in and out like ghosts. For hours, it was chaos. The invaders were supposed to crush resistance instantly. Instead, they were bleeding men against just 80 riders and a village of fishermen. But here's what blew my mind. The Mongols, the same warriors who had rolled through empires, were suddenly stuck. Their greatest weapon, the steppe cavalry, was useless here. These weren't wide grasslands. They were cliffs and goat trails. Horses couldn't charge. They could barely move. Their archers tried to rain down arrows, but dense branches blocked their aim. Every volley fell short, splintering against rocks and trees. And every time they pushed forward in numbers, they were ambushed from another angle. It must have felt like fighting ghosts. Strike one samurai down and 2 more appeared from the mist, vanishing into the trees before anyone could regroup. The day dragged on in a blur of ambushes, war cries, and collapsing shield lines. And yet, somehow, those 80 men still held, exhausted, bloodied, their quivers nearly empty but unbroken. And then came the breaking point. From the cliffs, Sukekuni spotted fresh reinforcements rowing toward the beach. Hundreds more soldiers. If they landed, the fight would end before nightfall. He knew the island was lost, but surrender, that word didn't exist in a samurai's world. So Sukekuni gathered his last 80 mounted warriors, horses pawing the sand, blades gleaming in the dying light. A quiet nod between brothers who knew exactly what came next. Then thunder, hooves pounding across the only stretch of flat beach, the sound rolling like drums of defiance. Katana clashed against spears, steel crashed against shields. The samurai slammed into the Mongol wall, carving chaos through the ranks. But it was a storm against a mountain. Half of them fell within minutes. Sukekuni himself took an arrow to the chest, but refused to yield. Sword still clenched in both hands, he cut down enemy after enemy until he finally collapsed. And yet, their charge worked. The Mongols staggered, stunned that so few men had dared to hit them head-on, forcing them to pull back, regroup, and rethink. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a purple mist rolled over the battlefield. The Mongol commander, rattled, ordered his men back to their ships for the night. And that pause changed everything. Because while Tsushima burned, its villages torched, its defenders slaughtered, the island had done its duty. From its southern tip, the signal fires blazed, casting a glow all the way to Kyushu. The warning had spread. Japan now knew the storm was coming. Think about it. Just 80 mounted samurai, backed by a handful of villagers, had forced the mightiest empire on earth to slow down. They bought time, and in war, time is everything. Tsushima was devastated, but its sacrifice echoed far beyond the island. It became a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest force standing on their land could shake giants. And here's the thing, the Mongols weren't done. After Tsushima, they set their sights on the next stepping stone, Iki Island. Waiting there was another tiny band of defenders, around 100 samurai, who just like Sukekuni's men, would choose defiance over surrender. Their story is every bit as brutal and every bit as legendary. That's what I'll break down in part 2. So what do you think? Could you imagine charging headfirst into an army knowing you wouldn't return? That's the legacy of Tsushima, a lesson in courage against impossible odds. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe, because Iki's story is next.